There is a particular kind of power that Hollywood has never known how to categorize: the power of refusal. Not the refusal of a man who has nothing to lose, which cost nothing and means nothing. The refusal of a man at the height of his market value, when studios are calling and the checks are large, and every agent in the building is telling him that saying no to this one would be professional suicide. That kind of refusal is rare. It is also, when you examine it carefully, the most revealing thing a person can do. Because what a man declines to do, when he has every reason in the world to say yes and chooses instead to say no, tells you more about who he actually is than anything he ever agreed to. Charles Bronson said no more than almost anyone in his generation of actors. He said it quietly, without elaboration, without the press conferences and carefully worded statements that studios expect when a major star declines a major project. He simply said no and moved on, and let the industry process his refusal without his assistance. Some of those refusals were practical, but some of them were something else entirely: principled, instinctive, deeply personal decisions that the industry interpreted as eccentricity or stubbornness, and that Bronson himself would have described, if pressed, in the simplest possible terms. It wasn't right. Not for him. Not for the reasons he had decided, long ago and without fanfare, to keep working. And several of the roles he declined, roles that were offered to him specifically, roles for which the studios wanted him before they wanted anyone else, went on to define other actors' careers, went on to win Academy Awards, went on to become some of the most celebrated performances in the history of American cinema. The man who turned them down went back to Vermont, picked up a paintbrush, had dinner with his family, and never once, in any interview anyone can find, expressed regret about any of it. To understand the refusals, you have to understand the relationship Bronson had with Hollywood, which was, from the beginning and throughout, a relationship of mutual utility conducted at arm's length. He needed the industry to provide the work. The industry needed his face, his presence, the specific quality he brought to roles that no other actor in his generation could replicate. This was a transactional arrangement, and both parties understood it as such. What the industry did not always understand was that Bronson was not available for the parts of the arrangement that went beyond the transaction. The cultivation of image, the performance of gratitude, the elaborate social machinery of Hollywood held no interest for him and received none of his time. He was not hostile to the industry. He simply did not participate in it beyond the specific requirements of the work itself. He showed up on set. He delivered the performance. He went home. And when he declined a role, there was no negotiation, no counteroffer, no conversation about what it would take to change his mind. When Bronson said no, the conversation was over. The first major refusal that the industry took note of came in the mid-1960s, when Bronson was still building the international reputation that would eventually force Hollywood to reckon with what it had been casually overlooking. He was offered a role in a major studio production, a prestige picture with a significant director attached, the kind of film that the industry understood as career-defining. The role was substantial. The money was meaningful. Everyone around him told him to take it. He read the script and set it aside. The character, he felt, was hollow at its center, constructed from genre requirements and commercial calculation rather than from any genuine interior truth. He could not find the human being inside the role. And for Bronson, who had spent years working with very little, the quality of the work was the only thing that outlasted the circumstances of its production. A role without a human being at its center was not a role worth taking, regardless of what it paid. The film was made without him. It performed adequately. It has not been remembered. Bronson continued working on projects the industry considered less prestigious and that he considered more honest, and the accumulation of that work was building quietly the international reputation that would eventually make him impossible to ignore. The refusal that generated the most discussion involved a film that became, in the hands of the actor who ultimately played it, one of the landmark performances of the 1970s. The details have been reported differently by different sources, because Bronson did not explain himself. He made his decision, communicated it through the appropriate channels, and did not elaborate for public consumption. What is known is that the role was offered to him. What is known is that he read the material. What is known is that he said no. And what is known, the part that the industry found so difficult to absorb, is that the film went on to define the decade, and the performance that replaced his potential performance became one of the most celebrated in American cinema, and the actor who gave it received the Academy Award. Bronson, when asked about this in one of the few interviews where the subject was raised directly, said something that journalists found unsatisfying, and that, examined carefully, is the most coherent possible explanation of his process. He said that he had read the material and that it hadn't felt right. Not that it was bad material, not that he doubted the project's potential, simply that when he sat with it, the connection he needed to find in order to do it honestly was not there. And without that connection, he was not interested. The industry translated this as arrogance. What it actually was, and this distinction matters, was the application of a standard that Bronson had developed, not from arrogance, but from necessity. In the years when the work had been scarce and the roles had been small, he had learned that the only sustainable basis for the work was honest engagement with the material, not the professional simulation of investment, actual genuine connection with the human truth inside the character. When that connection was available, he delivered something the camera recognized and audiences felt. When it was not, no amount of money or prestige could manufacture it. The second major refusal involved a character study with strong dramatic demands and a prestigious production. The producers wanted Bronson specifically. There was something in his quality, the compressed interior life, the sense of enormous experience behind minimal expression, that made him the right fit for a character who needed to communicate depths that the script only partially excavated. He met with the director. He read the script. He sat with it in the way he approached all material, slowly, honestly, without performed enthusiasm. He declined. His reasons, as reconstructed from peripheral accounts, had to do with a quality difficult to name. The film, in Bronson's assessment, was not quite honest about its own subject. It was reaching for profundity while protecting itself from the actual cost of the material it explored. It was performing depth rather than achieving it. This distinction, which a less rigorous artist might have overlooked in exchange for the career benefits, was, for Bronson, a disqualifying fact. The director found another actor. That actor inhabited the role with a commitment and courage that the film had not initially seemed to demand, and discovered in the doing of it that the material was stronger than it appeared. The performance won the Academy Award. The film became a touchstone of its era, and the director later said that he had not fully understood what his own film required until he found someone willing to give it everything. Bronson said nothing about any of it. He continued working on projects that international audiences received with genuine enthusiasm. He built the body of work that would eventually produce Death Wish, the film that made the domestic American audience finally confront what the rest of the world had been watching for a decade. He continued developing the private life, the Vermont farmhouse, the painting studio, the family that was, by every account of those who knew him, the actual organizing principle of his existence. And he continued saying no to a thriller that became a major commercial success, to a drama that became a critical landmark, to a war film that defined a generation's relationship to a particular historical moment. In each case, the reason was the same. It wasn't right. He couldn't find the honest connection. Without that, he wasn't interested. The industry's frustration with this position was both understandable and revealing. Understandable because the entertainment business is built on the premise that everything has a price, that any objection can be addressed through the right combination of money and creative accommodation. Revealing because the frustration itself demonstrated what the industry could not accept, that Bronson's standard was not irrational. It was simply not theirs. His measure was simpler and harder to satisfy. It was the measure of a man who had grown up in a world where honesty was a survival requirement, where the gap between what you presented and what was actually true had immediate and physical consequences. In Ehrenfeld, Pennsylvania, in the coal mines, in the Pacific War, pretending that something was other than what it was cost something real. Bronson carried that understanding into his professional life and applied it without exception, without negotiation, without apology. The roles he declined and that others made into great performances were, in many cases, genuinely great roles. The actors who took them and made them iconic had their own courage and their own relationship to the material. This is not a story about Bronson being right and everyone else being wrong, but what his refusals tell us, what they have always told us, for those willing to read them carefully, is something about the interior architecture of the man, about what he thought the work was for. He was not trying to win awards. He was not managing a career. He was trying to do work he could honestly stand behind, work in which the human being he brought to the role found genuine connection with the human being the role contained. The performances that come from genuine connection last. They outlast the award seasons and the box office numbers. They persist because audiences can feel the difference between a performance that was crafted and a performance that was meant. Charles Bronson's record of refusal is, in its way, as significant as his record of achievement, because every no he said was a yes to something else, to the standard, to the honesty, to the quiet understanding that the work only means something when the man doing it means every word of it. He meant every word. He always had. The awards went to other men. The legacy belonged entirely to him. The legacy of a standard maintained without compromise across an entire career, in an industry built on compromise, in a world that has always found the honest position the most difficult one to sustain. Charles Bronson sustained it, quietly, completely, without announcement. The way he sustained everything that mattered to him, with the specific, undemonstrative permanence of a man who learned very early that the only things worth keeping are the ones you refuse to trade away, no matter what is offered in exchange. That is the real performance, the one the camera never caught, the one that has outlasted all of it. He went back to Vermont after every refusal. He picked up the paintbrush. He sat at the table with the people who mattered. And in the silence of a house far from Hollywood, in the particular New England quiet that the industry could never reach and never understood, he held the life he had built, not the life the industry had offered him, not the life the awards and the prestige projects and the carefully managed career arc could have produced, but the life he had chosen, piece by piece, refusal by refusal, with the same patient deliberateness he brought to everything. It was not a smaller life. It was, in every measure that he recognized as real, a larger one. Because the size of a life is not determined by its visibility, but by its honesty, by the fidelity with which a person lives inside their own values rather than performing the values the world would prefer, by the willingness to say no, clearly and finally, to the things that require you to pretend, and to say yes, with full commitment, to the things that do not. Charles Bronson said no to some of the most celebrated roles in American cinema. He said yes to himself, every time, without exception. In an industry that treats self-betrayal as the cost of admission, that was the most radical thing he ever did. More radical than any character he played, more lasting than any film he made, more true finally than anything the camera ever caught him doing. The roles he refused became other men's monuments. The refusals themselves became his. There is something worth sitting with in the end about what a career built on principled refusal actually looks like from the outside, and what it looks like from the inside, from the perspective of the man living it. From the outside, it looks like stubbornness. It looks like missed opportunity. It looks like a man who could have won the award, could have taken the role, could have done the thing that everyone in the room agreed was the right next move, and chose instead to do something smaller, something quieter, something that the machinery of recognition was not designed to reward. It looks at certain moments in the career like failure, like a man who doesn't understand how the game is played, or who understands it and refuses to play it, which is worse in the industry's accounting than not understanding at all. From the inside, it looks like something else entirely. It looks like a man who woke up every morning knowing exactly who he was and what he was doing and why. It looks like a man who read scripts the way a mechanic listens to an engine, not for what he was supposed to hear, but for what was actually there. It looks like a man who had spent the formative years of his life in conditions where the gap between appearance and reality had tangible physical consequences, and who had carried that education into every professional decision he ever made. It looks from the inside like integrity, which is not the same as success, and is not always recognized by the same ceremonies, but which has a durability that success on its own has never been able to match. Charles Bronson knew the difference. He always had. And in every room where a script was placed in front of him, and a number was written on a check, and a director leaned forward and explained why this one was different, why this one was the one, he applied the same honest question he had always applied. Is the human being in this role someone I can find, and mean, and deliver without pretending? When the answer was yes, he worked. When the answer was no, he left. It was never more complicated than that, and it was never less important.